So we're going to continue this morning in our study of Luke's Gospel. And we're still in chapter 8, but we'll be finishing chapter 8 today. Nothing's too much trouble, apparently. Hello?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
You hear that phrase bandied about all too readily. Listen, if I can help you, nothing's too much trouble. Really? Will be put to the test, shall we? So here we are, Luke chapter 8. What an incredibly busy day. There's been so much to be done, people to see, places to go, and seemingly no time to do it. Ever been there?
Yeah.
Everybody's hand up goes up now.
Yeah.
The wind and the waves had tried to stop the mission, but that was all sorted. Why? Because Jesus was in the boat.
Yes.
Oh, I thought you were going to shout it back at me then. I'll try again. The wind and the waves had tried to stop the mission, but that was all sorted because
Jesus was in the boat.
That's it. Good. Excellent. You're with me now. You cannot be diverted. You have a vision. You cannot be delayed. You're on a mission.
Yeah.
And you cannot be drowned because you're being commissioned to fulfill His plan.
That's right.
Yeah.
What a wonderful account.
Yeah.
Jesus took time out to cross the lake
Yes.
to meet with a madman, one individual, one who was outcast from society, a stranger because he was strange, a man with a reputation that meant he was blamed for everything that went wrong in town. Here he was, a man without a friend in the world. In today's society, where nobody has enough time to do anything, especially those who are sick or seen as mentally ill, isn't it wonderful to know that Jesus cares?
Yes.
That nothing was too much trouble for Him. The authority of Jesus to just say the word, and this man was completely free
Yeah.
and healed.
Yes.
Verse 35. And the people went to see what had happened, and when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind.
Yes.
And they were afraid. What a difference.
Yes.
What a moment where one word from Jesus changed this man's life forever.
Yeah.
And left those who knew him in no doubt whatsoever that things had changed. Remember, I'll mention it again this morning, the proof of this man's freedom was that when he asked Jesus to become one of his disciples, Jesus says no. And to a man who had suffered from rejection for years, this surely should have sent him into a desperate state for the rest of his life that he might never recover from. But rejection and the fear of rejection and all the fear and depression that is connected to rejection has gone. He is now been set free at last. And so instead of feeling rejected by Jesus, he set about living and testifying in his hometown of all that God had done for him. That's the proof that this man was set free. Not just because he was talking sense, and not just because he was clothed appropriately, but because he was able to cope with with something that would have destroyed him just moments before. And this busy day is set to continue. Are you ready?
Yes.
Read from verse 40, shall we? Luke chapter 8, verse 40. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. And as Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. When all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. And in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. And when he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. And meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She is not dead, but asleep. They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, My child, get up. And her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. Did you notice it? It's truly amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's nothing that's too much trouble for Jesus. In Mark's Gospel, the time frame for all this frantic activity is confirmed. Don't really notice it in Luke's account, but in Mark's account, you read, it's quite clear that this was immediate. Mark chapter 5, verse 18. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demonized begged to go with him. So in other words, no sooner has Jesus brought healing to the man, than Jesus is getting back in the boat.
Yeah.
He went for the one and now he's going back. How many times is Jesus willing to cross the lake?
Yeah.
We could easily miss that important point. Jesus went across the lake at night just to meet up with that poor demonized man. After ministering deliverance to him, Jesus gets back in the boat to return to the other side of the lake. That was it. That was what the whole point of the journey was, just for the one.
Yeah.
Crossed the lake at night after a busy day teaching, battling through a storm until Jesus spoke to the wind and the waves, out to the tombs to meet a madman. Now that sounds like a lot of trouble, and most people today would say, what for? Why would you bother? But to Jesus, it's no trouble at all. And now, enter Jairus, a synagogue ruler, a guy who would have definitely had some pretty solid opinions about who Jesus was.
Yeah.
And from what he'd heard, they probably weren't good news. But Jairus, as the ruler of the synagogue, who would have been responsible for the conduct of the services, he would have been one of those most important, most respectable men in the community. But something happened. His daughter was ill. As synagogue ruler, his mind would have been made up about Jesus. He would have seen Jesus as an outsider, possibly as a dangerous heretic. But Jairus was a guy who was all ready to abandon his prejudices. He was ready to let go of his original thinking and ideas and his preconceived attitudes. He was ready to let them all go. Why? Because his daughter was ill. He had to abandon them all for her sake. Are you ready to do the same? Your ideas of Christianity, of the church, some prejudices that have coloured your thinking for years, Jairus dropped them all. Would you? Will you? What is your need today? Remember, nothing is too much trouble for Jesus. Not only did Jairus drop his prejudices, but he also dropped to his knees. He was willing to forget his position in society. He was willing to be what needed to be done, drop to his knees, in church, in town, in front of people, didn't matter, wherever it was.
Yes.
He was willing to humble himself and plead for his daughter's life. Verse 41 and 42, then a man named Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. Why? Remember, on this busy day, nothing is too much trouble for Jesus. And now the story moves on a pace because there's a very large gathering, crowding to get near to Jesus. In the Amplified Bible, we're told, as Jesus went, the people were crowding against him, almost crushing him. Yeah. Gives you some idea of this scene. This wasn't just a nice, pleasant gathering of people who come to him. This was a crush of people, desperate to get to Jesus. I wonder how Jairus was feeling at that moment. Maybe he was trying to clear the crowds. Keep walking, please. Excuse me. Gang away, make way. This is an emergency. Jesus, coming through. Stand back. Give him air. Maybe he thought that Jesus might change his mind with all these crowds. Seeing all these people, hearing all their cries for help. He's thinking, this could take forever. Jesus, I need you to come now. She's dying. My daughter's dying. And now enters this dear lady who had a serious bleeding problem. For 12 years she'd been suffering. It's actually very interesting to notice that Dr. Luke doesn't actually mention that she'd spent all her money on doctors and hadn't got any better. Interesting, isn't it? Yes. You have to read Mark's Gospel to find that out. That she'd gone to the doctors and spent all her money and not got any better. In fact, grew worse. And now with all these people squashing her and Jesus, maybe all sorts of thoughts were entering Jairus' mind. And maybe entering her mind. Maybe he's too busy today. Look at all the crowds. She's thinking, and now there's an emergency. He's not going to be interested in me. Little old me. I'm just not worth it. Not today. Maybe tomorrow. And those sorts of thoughts, especially when you've suffered for 12 long years, making you penniless and feeling worse than ever, it would have been enough to finish her off. But this dear woman who'd been cast out of society for years, remember, if she touched you in the street, then you would have been deemed to be unclean for the rest of the day. That's interesting, isn't it? I wonder what sort of rejection problems she carried around with her. But she had a plan. And having been told for 12 years that she mustn't touch anybody, her plan was to touch Jesus. Even though she'd been told not to touch. She knew deep down inside that touching Jesus was the only way. And as she reached out and touched Jesus' cloak, immediately, we're told, her bleeding stopped. It's very interesting to notice that her healing cost Jesus something, and the power went out from him to heal her. But that's all okay, because there's nothing that's too much trouble for Jesus. Jairus, he must have been frantic at this point. Yes, wonderful, great. I'm glad you've been here, my dear. That's marvellous. Thank you very much. Jesus, will you please hurry up? Come on. Gangway, we're on a mission. I'm so pleased for you, my dear. That's wonderful news. Wonderful. Now my daughter's dying. Hurry up, please. But Jesus said, hold on a moment. Someone touched me. And Jesus speaks directly to the lady. daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. What a bonus. Healed and at peace. Remember, there's nothing that's too much trouble for Jesus. And Jairus must have been frantic by now, but at this point the men came with the news about his daughter, and it wasn't good news. I'm sorry, Jairus, she's dead. Don't bother or trouble the teacher anymore. And there it is. If only we could shout back for Jairus this morning, for him to be able to hear, nothing is too much trouble for Jesus. But it's okay. We don't need to shout, because Jesus immediately responds. Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. See how Jesus addresses the fear immediately?
Yes.
He knows. What will settle on your heart on hearing the bad news was fear. And Jesus deals with it immediately. Because fear is the opposite end of faith. Jesus says, don't be afraid, just believe. It's a fantastic proof of what we've been saying so far throughout this remarkable day. Jesus ignored the bad news. He did not let the bad news affect him whatsoever. You can't trouble him today with your request. Neither will that bother him, because nothing is too much trouble for Jesus today. And so they continue on to Jairus' house with Peter, James and John, all the paid mourners and all their crying and all their wailing, all this commotion outside the house, all the attempts to mourn and wail, bringing doubt and fear and unbelief. Anybody know what that's like?
Yeah.
When you're trying to stand in faith, when you're trying to stand for the truth, make it declare, make it clear what you say, what you believe that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you can ask or think, and you've got everybody around saying, no. Isn't it awful? Isn't it sad? Isn't it bad? Again, just briefly, I want to highlight a verse in Mark's account of what happened on this rather busy and now very dramatic day. Mark chapter 5 verse 40, Mark puts it this way, after he put them all out.
Yes.
He took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went into where the child was.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So all these mourners and wailers and weepers and groaners and fearful lot, what did Jesus do? Out. Up it. No fear here.
That's right.
No fear here. When it comes to faith, would Jesus have to put you out, or would he bring you in? Now there's the question. In that situation, what would Jesus do? Would he say, come with me, I need you to be with me. We're going to go in here and just minister life into death situation. Would you be going, yeah, great, I'm with you? Or would you be saying, phone Pastor Dave? That's a question, isn't it? Jesus put the wailers and those that mocked him out.
Yeah.
Shut the door.
Yeah.
Of it. Because we're ministering life into what looks like a dead situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he took Peter, James and John,
Yes.
and the parents. So the parents believed.
Mm.
They believed.
Yeah.
And they saw the power of God at work through Jesus with their own two eyes.
Yes.
And in doubt, disbelief, and even disdain, the mockers saw nothing. Until they saw this little girl playing in the street the next day.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
How would you describe where you're at today? Are you in faith? Or are you in fear? It's time to take Jesus at his word. There's nothing that is too much trouble for him. You won't bother him by your request. It's your faith he is waiting to respond to.
Yeah.
What will bother him is if you decide not to use a measure of faith to call on him in your time of need. Now that might be down to pride. It might be down to prejudice. It might be because of your position or standing in society. It might be because of your popularity or your street cred. Maybe that's what's holding you back. But that is, in fact, the only thing that will bother Jesus. He wants you to ask. This was a miracle of life for a 12-year-old girl. He took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned and at once she stood up. Nothing, absolutely nothing was too much trouble for Jesus. Jesus, I believe you. Nothing, even death itself, it's possible. Don't fear, just believe, Jesus said. Bold words, weren't they?
Yeah.
Notice now that Jesus asks something of the parents. Jairus had seen that there was nothing that was too much trouble. And so Jesus gives some strict instructions to see if they will respond in the same way. He says, give her something to eat.
Yeah.
Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened.
Yeah.
Would that be too much trouble, I wonder, for the parents? For Jairus and his wife, there would only be gratitude and thanks. Whatever you say, Jesus, we'll do. But I have a distinct feeling that Luke mentions this little detail for a specific reason.
Yeah.
She needs feeding. She needs strength. And this is probably for us as a church. We must ask ourselves this question. Are we ready to do whatever's necessary to follow up in discipling new Christians? When you come to know Jesus as your Lord and Saviour, you've literally been brought from death to life, spiritually.
Yeah.
But making a decision to follow Jesus or praying a prayer isn't where it stops, it's where it all begins.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need some nourishment. You need to hear God speaking to you through the reading of the Bible for yourself. You need to know when your Heavenly Father cares and understands, and when the issues of the day come to hound you, for you to pray and be encouraged that you see your prayers being answered.
Yeah.
You need to be ready to learn and grow and stretch your faith, and for that you'll need feeding. And where are we as the church? That's the challenge for us. Are we prepared to do what it takes to feed the hungry, both physically and spiritually? There are many who go without physical food because they can't afford to eat. Yes, in Old Colwyn. Or they feed their children first. It's happening all around us. But there are thousands more people who fail to feed their spirit man every day. And then wonder why they feel faint, why they can't cope, why they just don't get it anymore. They need spiritual food, God's word. Remember, God's word is alive and active. It gives you strength to face the day, direction to make it through, and purpose when the way ahead seems impossible. So are we ready to do the legwork of doing all we can for those who Jesus has healed, helped, saved and restored? They need feeding. Or is that just too much trouble? Remember, nothing is too much trouble for Jesus. Where are you today? Maybe it's an issue of life that's crowded in on your thinking, on your emotional state. Maybe it's one of those days. And you think, oh, he's too busy. Look at the crowds. Everybody's asking, everybody's crowding in, everybody's all around. If you remember just but one thing this morning, nothing's too much trouble for him today. All it takes is that seed of faith to bring it to him and see what he does. Let's bow our heads. The enemy of your soul and mind would love for you to pull back. Like that dear woman who must have had it in her heart at the last moment, I shouldn't touch anybody. She'd been told it for 12 years. Oh, how she longed for the sensitivity of a human touch. For someone to be able to put their arms around her and just show some compassion. But for 12 long years she'd been cast out from society. And at that last moment, no doubt the thought was in her mind, I can't, I shouldn't. But she pressed in. She did what she knew was in her heart to do, because nothing was too much trouble for Jesus. You press in right now where you are. Lord, I need you. Lord, I cry to you. Have mercy on me. Because nothing's too much trouble for him. And then the question of whether in dealing with the mockers, the mourners and the wailers, those crying, paid to do a job that would feed the fear and despair and despondency and the desperate feelings of loss when you lose a child. Would Jesus bring you in? Or would he say, you need to wait outside a minute? I need faith, not fear, when I minister life into a dead situation. Only you know what's in your heart today. But I ask that you come to God and say, I believe. Help me in my unbelief, that I might be with you to minister life into dead situations. You do your business with the Lord today. As we sing our final song this morning, if you want to be prayed for, then come forward. The ministry team will pray with you. But let us all make sure that we're ready to feed the hungry. Those that, yes, need physical food, but today the thousands upon thousands that pass the front doors of Shore Hope Church every day, every week. And their spirit man is starving to death, needing to know what it is to be brought into life in a relationship with God. In Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. I meant to say earlier, well. That, Lynn Pritchard sends her love and wants me to express to you all thanks for your prayers and support. It was her mum's funeral yesterday, and up in Cleesline Church, and I was able to share just briefly a few moments there. And please remember her father, who at 99 with his soon coming 100th birthday was quite broken at the loss of his dear wife, but there's a real sense of determination with him as well, so that's good, isn't it? So remember Lynn, and she says, with family with her this weekend, she's hoping to be back with us next week. Oh, bless you, thank you.